It's Saturday, and welcome to another episode of PO Cubed, your chronological guide to Nintendo's handheld consoles. My name's DD Ash, and this week we're playing Sakegake Otokojuku Mikushima Kessen, Amazing Penguin, Bionic Battler, Hong Kong, and Dragon Slayer 1. Let's start the show. Sakegake Otokojuku Mikushima Kessen, developed by Toei Animation and published by Yutaka. Based on the anime of the same name, Sakegake Otokojuku is a 1v1 fighting game where you play as the sword-wielding sociopath Momotaro. The source material is not known in the same realms of your Yanma 1/2 or your Gundam, and never saw a release anywhere other than Japan. It's heavily based on Japanese history and culture, including straying into the dicey worlds of nationalism and passive racism, and would in no way successfully translate to an English-speaking audience. There's no way to instill humour into it as you'd find in your Dragon Ball Z or Pokemon, for example. I kind of understand the plethora of puzzle games on Game Boy so far. They're relatively easy to program and don't require massive graphical or gameplay stretches to figure out. Fighting games, however, surely require more finesse and nuance in the control scheme than could be offered by the two-button format, especially if you don't use the two buttons properly. Sure, there are your Mortal Kombats and Street Fighter 2s of this world, but for every successful one, there seems to be 4 or 5 god-awful or simply subpar attempts. Let's be honest, it wasn't until the dawn of the two aforementioned fighting game royalty that there were really any fighting games worth playing, certainly not retrospectively through today's eyes. All that said, if you can believe it, the standard of this game is low even by 1990 standards. You have one attack used by pressing B and jump using A. That is the entirety of the control scheme. No way to block, no variation in the skills, or really anything at all. It was already an established motif that you press up to jump in these sorts of games, thus freeing up the other face button to, do stuff. The graphics are somehow less detailed than Fist of the North Star, which is some kind of accomplishment. It's a task to differentiate between the characters, and the background is the most sterile-looking mountain range of triangles that never changes. It's probably not possible to have more cliched music than what's on offer here. The AI are idiotic and prove no challenge at all, fruitlessly jumping into the air without really ever attacking you. No challenge, that is, until you meet the boss. The cheapness of his movements, not even smooth by the way, he just seems to phase in and out of reality while also jumping off screen half the time. It's almost insulting, you'll never hit the guy. Let's have a little info session about the publishers of this car crash, shall we? This may be the first you've heard of Yutaka, but you know their work. Remember Master Karateka? That dumpster fire was published by an offshoot of Bandai called Bandai Shinsei. That little sub-company was essentially renamed Yutaka, strangely meaning a bountiful harvest, and served as a way for Bandai to release crappy toys and shovelware video games without having to sully their good name by putting their logo on them. This probably worked too, seeing as how there would continue to be much dross released on Game Boy and beyond, with Yutaka emblazoned on the front. You thought your dirty little secret was safe, didn't you, Bandai? But it's the 21st century now, and we've got Wikipedia.
有200幾種遊戲合帶嘅任天堂 Game Boy， 隨時隨地都咁刺激。Game Boy 套裝隨機附送俄羅斯方塊遊戲合帶，雙打線、立體聲耳筒，1年免費保有任天堂 Game Boy 套裝。
Amazing Penguin DMG-PN, developed and published by Natsume. Penguins again, but this one is totally different. It has a beret on and is apparently an electrician. Still with me? Okay, this is another one of those Pac Man adaptations where you navigate a maze made of electric cables and have to collect and destroy all the dots, or nodes, before the enemies catch you. This goes right down to the enemies. They look exactly like the ghosts in Pac Man, with not even an effort to say otherwise. The maze itself is like a grid, or a circuit I suppose, and you need to close all of the loops by destroying the nodes along the way. If an enemy is on a particular loop when all the power is turned off, they'll temporarily die. Pressing A next to one of the black dots causes it to go flying off, which can be used to knock enemies out. This is useful later on as you can kind of snipe at enemies from across the screen. Instead of power pellets, you have these lighter dots that look like electrons in a school kid's textbook. They're little circles with a minus sign in them. These make the enemies change direction, not away from you, just opposite. Graphically, it's simple, but simple works on the Game Boy, and it definitely does a better job than the port of Pac Man did. While not all levels are based on just a single screen, everything is clear. The music is very professionally composed and suits the nature of the game. Using headphones, you can hear how bassy the tracks are. It's always nice to get more of a broad spread out of the sound chip. If I had one complaint, it would be how precise you need to be to turn corners sometimes. You almost have to press the direction slightly before you move. It's not intuitive, but you get used to it. Amazing Penguin is nothing new really, but a well-made, at times frantic little action game. Please, no more penguins though, there are other animals, you know. Bionic Battler DMG-VS, developed by Copier Systems and published by Use Corporation in Japan and Electrobrain in North America. Hide and seek has turned deadly, and it ain't no kids game anymore. The name of the game is Pound or Be Pounded. My innuendo alarm is blaring in my head right now, but this isn't anything rude. In fact, the premise of Bionic Battler is kind of dark. The robots of Earth have rebelled, Asimov's laws pounded into dust, and you've been imprisoned in their quote-unquote labyrinths of war. Metallic mazes of mayhem designed for robots and guys in mech suits to have a massive tear-up. It's basically some futuristic gladiator arena where you're the sport. You choose one of two mech suits. It doesn't really matter which as they play identically. You're then asked to pick option on or off. Option for what? I don't know. It doesn't seem to change anything. Anyway, you take control of your suit from a 3D first-person perspective. The screen is separated into several different visuals and gauges. Top left is a radar. This tells you how close you are to another robot. If it starts filling up, then there's probably one within a couple of tiles. Top right is your energy, which governs your attacks. It decreases, but slowly, and you can kind of take it to be a time limit in a way. If it depletes, then you're dead. It's replenishable only by finding an E-tank. There's maybe one of these per level that I've ever found. The majority of the top half is your first-person view. Keep an eye on this regularly, although you don't really use it to navigate. The bottom half of the screen is largely taken up with the overhead map. It's this that is most useful. It helps you work out safe places, and enemies show up on it too. Either side of the map are gauges representing your and your enemy's health and missile charge. Hold B to charge a missile. When it's fully powered up, you can fire it 3 spaces, but it takes a long time to charge. Don't try to fire missiles if you're face to face with an enemy, as they'll beat you to death before you manage to fire. Instead, punch with A. Each maze has a certain number of enemies to destroy, and the difficulty curve is basically a numbers game. The higher you progress, the more targets you have to take down. After the first battle's over, you get out of your mech suit and watch as your little chap, who looks a little like the character from Blaster Master, walks into some old guy's office, shakes hands with him, and then seems to merge with him. Freaky stuff. You get paid $1, just the one, and flick the peace sign until you're ready to progress to the next stage. The prize goes up depending on which stage of the 5 you tackle, but so does the number of enemy robots. 3 on the first, up to 7 on the 5th. Being reasonably conservative is the order of the day in Bionic Battler. A good strategy is to find a nice corner somewhere to camp out in, charge the missile to the max with B, and then fire as soon as an enemy is within 3 spaces ahead of you. They'll either back off, in which case you just charge up again and wait for them to return, or they'll be stunned, which is when you move in closer and pummel them till they explode. Your health doesn't replenish unless you find one of the rare batteries, so be resourceful and use the safer places to your advantage. If you go tearing around the maze looking for enemies, they'll no doubt destroy you eventually. Remember, there's several of them, but only one of you. You only have one life to beat all 5 stages too. The sound effects are great for a game that was released this early in the Game Boy's youth, as is the music, although possibly more of a darker theme would have suited the game a little better. The tunes are kind of jazzy and feel like they're from a cartoonish platform or puzzle game, but then, for a game where robots are blowing each other apart, it's pretty cutesy itself. An interesting title that's really unique and comes as a breath of fresh air at this point. The maze navigation works very well, visually it looks brilliant, and the space is used very economically. There's little depth or finesse in what you're doing, but for a half-an-hour session, Bionic Battler is a ton of fun.
Game Boy 啦，打咗玩新潮流 Game Boy。我啲潮流興 Game Boy 啊，打咗好玩新潮流 Game Boy。卡拉 OK。 Game Boy 啦，打咗好玩新潮流 Game Boy。
Hong Kong DMG-HGJ, developed by Onion Software and published by Tokuma Shoten. Yet another tile-based mahjong-y solitaire affair. Well, it's not mahjong at all, except the tiles bear a resemblance in a small way. Here, you have an arrangement of tiles in towers of various shapes, and it's up to you to eliminate tiles one by one, based on the order you're told to, without the tower collapsing. This happens if a block is no longer supported underneath by at least one other. It stands to reason you need to work from the top down as much as possible, only taking tiles from within the structure if there are no free alternatives higher up. It might be possible to pick ones from within a wide structure, Jenga style, as long as you're careful. Taking these that are more surrounded grants you more points, if that's important to you. You click a tile that matches the one at the top, and if removing it would collapse the tower, you'll be alerted. Clicking it again ends the game. You can select different game modes, some are timed, some allow you to choose various board shapes. There's no real progression as such. Complete a level and you get a nice picture, but then it's back to the main menu. There's really little else to say about Hong Kong. A passable port of a Famicom game with debatable relevance and zero legacy. It's okay for a passing glance if you really can't find anything else amongst this 1,000-strong library, but it's certainly not making anyone's top 10 lists. What is quite impressive is the 3-letter seed that governs the board layout. Theoretically, this would give you 26 to the power 3 different possible layouts per board shape, and there are 10 shapes to choose from. In total, this gives you something like 175,000 different games to play. Whether they're all winnable, well, that's for the mathematicians to determine.
All 伝説の英雄と若き勇者たちが繰り広げる新たなる冒険、そして挑戦、圧倒的感動で迫る超大作 RPG ドラゴンスレイヤー英雄伝説2。今伝説から神話へ by Anderson。
Dragon Slayer 1 DMG-DSA, developed by Falcom and published by Epoch. Nihon Falcom are one of my personal favourite video game developers, more famous as they are these days for their wonderful Ys franchise of action RPGs. Many hours of my life have been spent in the company of Adol Christin on his ever more expansive adventures. Oft touted as one of the pioneers of this particular style of RPG, what we have here is a port of the 1984 PC-88 game of the same name that started off the Dragon Slayer series. Many of these were Japanese exclusive, although Dragon Slayer 4 was released on the NES and was called Legacy of the Wizard, so there's a chance you'll have heard of it. The aim of the inaugural Dragon Slayer game, although you wouldn't know it, there aren't any story cutscenes in this version, is to collect these 4 crowns that are each guarded by a dragon. Along the way, you need to collect or upgrade your weapons to ward off ever stronger enemies. Sounding pretty standard so far? Incorrect. First off, the controls are the stiffest I think I've ever experienced. Your character moves as if in stop motion, pausing on every tile. And that's fine in a turn-based dungeon crawler, but Dragon Slayer is marketed as a real-time action RPG. The response when trying to move is ludicrously inaccurate, sometimes requiring 3 or 4 presses of the D-pad to move your knight where you want him to go. The button controls are equally maddening. You expect to be able to attack, but A is used to pick up whatever's on the ground, and B brings up an empty magic menu. No, you have to first find a weapon, but to do this, you need to navigate towards a warp point that is miles away. You have 1 utility slot that needs to be used for shields, jewels, and so on. Picking up a ring, for example, allows you to move blocks around. A cross can be used to block paths as enemies cannot cross them. Collecting a jewel in the maze and returning it to your home allows you to level up stats and such. Having to press A on every single coin you find in order to pick it up is another facet of the game that gets very old very quickly. If you manage to navigate this block-pushing maze, you can then accompany your tool with a sword, but only after traversing a void completely filled with aggressive skeletons and spiders. Don't come into contact with any of them, because you're unarmed at this point and will be devoured. And you can't easily run from battle either. It's possible, but not intuitive, and you'll lose health doing so. Plus, if you get cornered, you're basically finished. The fighting sequences seem to be calculated based on a dice roll, which is fine if there's only 1 enemy. More than that accosting you can lead to an unwinnable situation where you barely get to attack. Another thing I should mention about the enemies, kill one and another will respawn somewhere on the map, but it'll be of a higher level than the one you just slew. Seeing as how your leveling up doesn't come from killing the enemies, it's probably beneficial to just avoid them, which is a pretty lame way of being a hero. The accompanying music is a 20-second loop that is an absolute cacophony. It starts off as a decent enough RPG-sounding tune, which quickly blends into a complete mess of notes offensive to the ears, causing anyone with hearing to immediately mute the game. The worlds are empty and uninspiring, with all the sprites, from a single coin to the player to a whole house, being the exact same size. I know it was the 90s, but some form of realism could have been attempted, or at least make the sprites look half decent. A huge problem is the amount of grinding you'll have to do to get anywhere, and it's a slow grind, not just because of the ridiculous movement. Ever-diminishing experience returns and laborious backtracking ensures there'll never be a speedrun of this game. You can, peculiarly, push your home in the same way you can push a block, in order to move it nearer to a cache of jewels, but really it doesn't help that much. You can also run the risk of forgetting where you put it. It's not just the tedium that's the problem with this artificially inflated gameplay. Remember that the Game Boy is a portable console, powered by batteries, unlike the home computer it was originally on. There's basically no way to complete the game on one set of batteries, even if you got the really good expensive ones. And this was 1990, way before the rechargeable power packs came out. Okay, fine. Final Fantasy or other RPGs around at the time were of a similar length, although much more compelling with it. But they had passwords or a save game mechanic, meaning you could turn the game off if you wanted a rest. Not here, oh no, you're playing this in real time. That's not immersion, and it's not practical. So unless you're playing this on emulator or a Super Game Boy, don't ever expect to see the ending. If you've just finished Link's Awakening and are looking for something in a similar vein, I implore you to please keep on looking. This ain't it. Thanks for listening to the Portable Power Podcast. If you want to support the show, the best way to do so is on Patreon at patreon.com/portablepowerpodcast. Or subscribe on the YouTubes. We have daily uploads Monday to Friday, where you can watch me suck at the games as I talk about them. You can tweet me at POCubed or on any of the other socials you might expect. Thanks again and have a great weekend.